The morning Belle Talbot buried her second child, the sky above Harlan County, Texas did not have the decency to cloud over. It stayed a merciless, open blue, the kind of blue that belonged on postcards and in paintings, not over a raw mound of red dirt with a wooden cross driven into it by a woman whose hands had stopped shaking somewhere around the third hour of digging. She had dug it herself because there was no one left to help her. The neighbors who had once brought casseroles and quiet words had long since grown tired of tragedy following Belle Talbot like a shadow follows a man at noon, small at first, then growing, then swallowing him whole. Her husband, Roy Talbot, had left 14 months prior. Not in a box, not in any honorable way. He had simply saddled his horse one Tuesday morning in April of 1873, told Belle he was riding to Caldwell for supplies, and never come back. She had waited 3 days before she allowed herself to understand. Then she had gone to the barn, sat down in the hay beside the old mule he had not bothered to take, and cried until there was nothing left inside her that was soft. She was 26 years old, and she had already lost a husband, a son named Thomas who had come into the world too early and left it even faster, a daughter named Ruth who had made it 14 months before a fever took her between one sunset and the next, a homestead that was slowly returning itself to the earth for want of repairs she could not make alone, and very nearly her own mind. But Belle Talbot had not lost her spine. That was the thing people in Harlan County underestimated about her. The ones who whispered at the dry goods store and shook their heads at Sunday service and murmured that the woman was cursed, that she carried misfortune in her blood the way some women carried freckles. They saw the grief on her face and mistook it for weakness. They did not see what happened after she closed her door at night. They did not see her light the lamp and sit at the kitchen table with the ledger she kept in Roy's absence, tallying what she had, what she owed, what she might do. They did not see her haul water from the creek in the early morning dark, or patch the fence line with wire she had bought with the money from selling her mother's silver hairbrush, the last thing of her mother's she had possessed. They saw a woman bent. They did not see that bending is not the same as breaking. It was a letter that changed the trajectory of everything, arriving on a Thursday in late September of 1874, when the mesquite trees along the creek had gone gold, and the air carried the first real suggestion of autumn. It came by way of the postal rider, a boy named Hector who was 17 and always slightly out of breath, and it bore a return address from Beaumont County in West Texas, a name she did not recognize attached to a ranch she had never heard of. The letter was brief. It was, in fact, startlingly brief for what it was asking. It read as follows: Mrs. Talbot, I am writing in response to your notice posted in the Harlan County Gazette of August last. I am a rancher, 31 years of age, in good health, of sound finances, and in need of a wife. I have no interest in pretense or pretty words. I need a woman who can endure the hardships of ranch life in the Western Territory, who can manage a household with little assistance, and who will not wilt at the first sign of difficulty. I am told you have endured considerable hardship yourself. If you are willing, I would ask that you write back and we will discuss the particulars. My name is Clement Bishop. The ranch is called the Double C. The nearest town is Harlan Springs. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table and went about her evening chores, fed the mule, checked the chickens, started a small fire against the coming night. She read it a third time by lamplight, and something moved in her chest that was not hope exactly, but was the distant cousin of it. He needed a woman who could endure. She nearly laughed out loud at that. Nearly. She had already endured more than this man would ever know. She wrote back that same night. Her letter was also brief, though slightly less so than his had been. She told him she was 26, a widow in the practical sense if not the legal one, that she had run a homestead on her own for over a year, that she was not afraid of hard work and had no illusions about romance. She told him she had lost children and that she understood grief. She told him she was not beautiful in the conventional fashion, but that she was strong and capable and honest. She told him she would need 2 weeks to put her affairs in order before she could travel, if he was agreeable to those terms. She did not tell him about Thomas. She did not tell him about Ruth. She decided those stories were hers to carry until she chose to set them down somewhere, and she had not yet decided where that somewhere would be. Clement Bishop wrote back within 8 days, which was nearly miraculous given the distances involved. He said the terms were agreeable. He said he would send money for the stage fare to Harlan Springs, and that he would meet her himself at the depot on whatever day she arrived, provided she sent word in advance. He said, and this part she read 4 times, that he was not a man given to eloquence, but that he appreciated plain speaking and hoped she did as well. She did. She sold the homestead to a young couple from Arkansas who had arrived in Harlan County with stars in their eyes and money from an inheritance, and a touching ignorance of what Texas summers could do to a person. She got a fair price for it, not a good one, but fair. She packed what remained of her life into a single trunk and a leather travel bag. Her mother's quilt, 2 good dresses, her working clothes, her boots, her Bible with Thomas and Ruth's names written inside the cover in her careful hand, a bone-handled kitchen knife, her ledger, and a small tin box containing $17.40 that she considered her emergency reserve against whatever came next. On the 9th of October, 1874, Belle Talbot boarded the Butterfield stage in Harlan County with her trunk loaded on top and her bag on her lap, and her chin at a particular angle that meant she had made up her mind and was not going to revisit the decision. The journey to Harlan Springs took 4 days, which was long enough to give a person too much time to think. She shared the stage with a traveling salesman who smelled of bay rum and talked too much, a Mexican woman named Senora Castillo, who was visiting her daughter and who fell asleep almost immediately and did not wake until they changed horses outside of Abilene, and a young man barely 20 who was heading west to make his fortune, and who was going to be disappointed in the specifics of that plan within 6 months, though Belle did not tell him so. She watched Texas unspool outside the window, the flat plains giving way to rougher country, the scrub brush and the limestone outcroppings, and the distances that seemed to go on forever in every direction as if the land were making a point about human insignificance. She had lived in Texas her whole life and had never quite made peace with how big it was, how it seemed to swallow things, people, plans, hopes, Roy Talbot, her children's small graves. She pressed her forehead briefly against the glass and breathed. Then she straightened up and watched the land instead of fighting with it. Harlan Springs was smaller than Harlan County, which she had not expected. It was a single main street with the requisite collection of buildings, a general store, a saloon, a livery, a bank the size of a generous closet, a church that leaned slightly to the left, and a scattering of houses behind them. The stage depot was a wooden platform with a roof over it and a boy with a dog sitting on the edge. She climbed down from the stage and stood in the afternoon dust and looked around and did not see anyone who seemed to be looking for her. Then she heard boots on the wooden planks behind her and turned. Clement Bishop was taller than she had imagined. She was not sure why she had imagined him at a particular height, but she had, and he exceeded it by several inches. He was lean in the way men who work outdoors are lean, not thin, but carved, as if there was nothing on him that wasn't earning its keep. He had dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that were currently doing what she would learn was their default setting, which was looking at her with an expression of careful, measured assessment that was neither cold nor warm but was very, very direct. He was 31 years old and he looked it, not in a bad way. In the way of a man who had spent a decade making something out of nothing in difficult country, and it had marked him, and he carried those marks without apology. He stopped a few feet from her and took off his hat. "Mrs. Talbot," he said. "Mr. Bishop," she said. They looked at each other for a moment that was long enough to be honest. "How was the journey?" he asked. "Long," she said. "Dusty." The salesman in the stage would not stop talking about liniment. Something shifted very slightly at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the suggestion of one offered and withdrawn almost immediately, like a hand extended and then reconsidered. "I have a wagon," he said. "The Double C is about 12 miles out. We can cover it before dark if we leave now." "Then let's leave now," she said. He carried her trunk to the wagon without being asked and without making a performance of it. She appreciated both things. He helped her up to the bench seat with a hand that was rough with calluses and warm, and then he went around and climbed up on his side and slapped the reins. They started out of Harlan Springs in the late afternoon light without having exchanged a single unnecessary word. It was, she thought, the most honest beginning she had ever had. The 12 miles between Harlan Springs and the Double C Ranch passed mostly in silence, which was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who were paying attention to each other without, yet having the vocabulary for what they were noticing. Belle watched the country around them, rougher than what she had come from Hillier, with dark cedar breaks along the ridgelines and a creek that ran amber with tannins in the low places. She could see cattle in the distance, small brown shapes against the brown grass, and further on the roofline of what had to be the ranch house. "How many head do you run?" she asked. He glanced at her sideways. "About 300 at present. Was 450 before the drought 2 years back." "You rebuilt from the drought?" "Still rebuilding," he said. "It's a process." She nodded. She understood processes. She understood the particular patience required for rebuilding something after it had been taken down to its bones. "You have hired hands?" she asked. "2 full-time. A man named Dewey Crane, who has been with me since I started the Double C, and a younger man named Santos Reyes who came on last spring. During Roundup I hire additional men from town." "Dewey Crane," she repeated. "What is he like?" Clement considered this with what she was beginning to understand was characteristic care. He did not answer questions without thinking about them first. "Reliable," he said finally. "He does not say much. He is a good judge of horses and a poor judge of weather. He has been wrong about rain approximately 40 times in the years I have known him, and has not yet accepted this about himself." Belle looked at the side of his face. "And Santos Reyes, 20 years old. He grew up working cattle in the Pecos country. He works hard and he is good company, and he sends money home to his mother in San Angelo every month without fail." He paused. "I mentioned that last thing because I think it says something important about a person's character." "It does," she agreed. Another silence settled between them, but it had shifted in quality, grown slightly warmer, the way a room warms when someone lights a fire in it. Small but real. The ranch house appeared as they crested a low rise, and Belle looked at it with the clear eyes she brought to everything. It was a substantial structure for the territory, 2 stories of limestone and cedar wood, a wide porch across the front, a good solid roof. It needed paint on the shutters, and one of the porch steps had a bad board in it, and the kitchen garden visible at the side of the house was overgrown with autumn weeds, but the bones of it were sound. She could see that immediately. "It needs work," Clement said, and there was something in his voice she could not quite classify, not apology exactly, but something close. Perhaps the offering of honesty before she could arrive at it herself. "Most things do," she said easily. "Work doesn't frighten me." He turned to look at her then fully, for the first time since they had left the depot. His gray eyes were doing that careful assessment again, but this time there was something else in them too, something that might have been surprise or might have been recognition. She met his gaze without flinching, and after a moment he nodded once and returned his eyes to the road. Dewey Crane came out of the barn as they pulled up, a compact, weathered man of perhaps 55 with a face like dried leather and eyes set so deeply under his brow they seemed to be watching from a cave. He said nothing, but he looked at Belle with a thorough and unsentimental appraisal that she recognized as the same kind she had just given the house. "Dewey," Clement said, climbing down. "This is Mrs. Talbot." "Ma'am," Dewey said, and then turned and went back into the barn. "He's welcoming by nature," Clement said, the corner of his mouth doing that almost smile again. "I can tell," she said. Santos Reyes appeared from around the side of the house with a bucket in each hand, and he was young in a way that made Belle feel the passage of time, bright-eyed and quick-moving, with a broad grin that he offered her without reservation. "Welcome to the Double C, Mrs. Talbot," he said, and the warmth in it was genuine, the kind that could not be manufactured. "Thank you, Santos," she said, and smiled back, because the smile was easy to give. Clement showed her through the house himself, which she appreciated. He did not make excuses for it, but he was honest about its deficiencies. The kitchen pump that stuck when the weather was cold, the window in the upstairs east room that did not latch properly, the cellar stairs that needed reinforcing. He showed her the room that would be hers, a good-sized room at the back of the house with a window that looked out over the creek bottom, a bed with an iron frame and a decent mattress, a washstand, a wardrobe. "The house has not had a woman in it for some time," he said. He said it matter-of-factly, without drama. "My mother came out from Dallas 2 years ago and made some improvements. Before that, it was only ever ranch hands." "How long have you owned the Double C?" she asked. "6 years," he said. "I bought the land from a man who had given up on it. I was 25 and I had $400 and a pair of horses and considerably more confidence than sense." "But the sense caught up," she said. "Mostly," he said. She set her travel bag on the bed and looked around the room and felt something settle in her chest, not happiness exactly, not yet, but something quieter and perhaps more durable. The possibility of steadiness, of ground under her feet that might not shift. "Mr. Bishop," she said, still looking at the room. "Clement," he said, "I think we can dispense with the formality, given the circumstances." She turned to face him. "Clement," she said, "I want to be direct with you." "I would appreciate nothing more," he said. "I am capable of everything you outlined in your letter. I can run this household, I can work hard, I can endure difficulty. I have done it alone and I can do it here. But I want you to understand that I am not," she paused, choosing the words carefully, "I am not coming here as a piece of equipment to be useful. I am a person. I have a history. I have opinions and I have feelings and I will not pretend otherwise." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes deepened. "Like water you look into and find is much further down than you expected." "I would not want you to pretend otherwise," he said. "That is not what I am looking for." "What are you looking for?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, not in the way of a man avoiding an answer, but in the way of a man taking the question seriously. "I am looking for a partner," he said finally. "Someone who is present, who is here in the full sense of that word. I have spent 6 years building something and I am tired of building it alone." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is an honest answer," she said. "I do not know another kind," he said. The wedding was performed the following Saturday by the minister from Harlan Springs, a round-faced man named Reverend Alcott, who rode out to the Double C on his best horse, and conducted the ceremony on the front porch with Dewey Crane and Santos Reyes as witnesses. Dewey looked at the middle distance throughout the entire proceedings, and Santos stood very straight and beamed at both of them as if he were personally responsible for the whole arrangement and was proud of the result. Belle wore her better dress dark blue calico with white buttons and had pinned her dark hair up neatly, and Clement had put on a clean white shirt and his good vest and had made an attempt at taming his hair that had been partially successful. They stood side by side on the porch in the golden October light and spoke the words the Reverend asked them to speak. And when Clement took her hand at the appropriate moment, his grip was firm and warm and deliberate, not a gesture, but a decision. When it was done, and Reverend Alcott had ridden away with a bottle of good whiskey as his fee, Santos made coffee and produced a dried apple cake he had baked that morning with a level of culinary ambition that surprised everyone, including himself. And they all sat on the porch together in the afternoon and ate cake and drank coffee, and Dewey said approximately 4 words over the course of the whole affair, which Belle was already learning was simply Dewey's way. That night, the first night of her marriage to Clement Bishop, Belle sat on the edge of the bed in her room, their room now. She corrected herself, though Clement had been careful and unhurried and had given her space to arrive at the arrangement on her own terms, and held her Bible open to the page where she had written Thomas's name and Ruth's name, and she sat with that for a long time. She was not weeping. She was doing something quieter and more deliberate. She was carrying them forward with her into this new life, making sure she did not leave them behind in the transition. They were hers. They would always be hers. Clement knocked softly before he came in, which she had not expected but which told her something about him that no amount of letters could have conveyed. He sat down in the chair by the window and was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You do not have to tell me what you are thinking about, but if you want to, I am here." She looked at him across the small room. The lamp was low between them. "I lost 2 children," she said. It came out more directly than she had planned, but direct was how she had decided to live. He did not look away. He did not offer condolences in the quick, deflecting way of people who are uncomfortable with grief. "How?" he asked quietly. "The first was born too early. The second," she paused. "Ruth, fever, she was 14 months old." "I am sorry," he said, and it was the plainest expression of sympathy she had ever received, and it was somehow the most sincere for its plainness. "I am telling you," she said, "because I do not want to carry it as a secret. It is part of who I am." "I understand," he said. She believed him. "Was there something that brought you to place the notice in the Harlan County Gazette?" she asked. "Something specific." He looked out the window at the dark. "My father died 2 years ago. My mother is in Dallas. I had a younger brother who died of a snake bite when we were boys. I was 12, he was 9. He said it in the same way she had spoken of her children, plainly, carrying the weight of it without needing it to be witnessed for it to be real. "I have built this ranch and I am proud of what it is. But I came in from the range 2 months ago on a Tuesday evening in August, and the house was empty and quiet in a way that felt—" He stopped, started again. "I have been alone on purpose for a long time. I convinced myself it was sufficient. That August evening told me I had been wrong about that." Belle Talbot looked at this man she had married 4 hours ago, this lean, gray-eyed, honest man who had built something good out of difficult country, and who had been alone in it and was tired of that being enough. And she felt the possibility she had sensed on the wagon ride deepen into something more specific. "We are going to be all right," she said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. He looked at her then with those careful eyes, and the almost smile became an actual one, brief and real. "I think we are," he said. The first weeks of her marriage to Clement Bishop were a revelation in the best possible sense, not because they were easy, but because every difficulty they encountered together was different in quality from the difficulties she had faced alone. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the only person who knows what needs doing and the only person available to do it, and Belle had lived inside that exhaustion for over a year. The absence of it was almost disorienting. She took the house apart and put it back together with the systematic thoroughness of a woman who had been planning her reorganization since approximately the first hour she had seen the place. She scrubbed the kitchen from floor to ceiling, reorganized the pantry with a logic that Santos declared miraculous, and addressed the overgrown kitchen garden by pulling the dead summer growth and turning the soil under for the spring. She found, in the back of a cabinet, a collection of canning jars that had been sitting empty long enough to have developed a thick film of dust, and she spent an afternoon cleaning them and making a list of what she intended to put in them come next summer. Clement watched all of this with the quiet attention that was characteristic of him. He did not interfere. He did not offer unsolicited opinions on her methods. But he paid attention, and she noticed that he paid attention, and the noticing of it did something warm and gradual to the space between them. On the 4th day, he asked if she would like to see the rest of the ranch, not just the house and immediate outbuildings, but the range itself, the creek bottom, the northern pasture where he was planning to expand come spring. He saddled a horse for her without asking whether she could ride, which she appreciated, because the question would have been a small insult, and he seemed to understand that. The horse he saddled for her was a bay mare named Clara, which struck Belle as funny, and when she asked he said she had come with the name and he had not seen any reason to change it. They rode out together in the early morning with the frost still white on the grass and the sky the particular sharp blue of a Texas October morning. And he showed her the double C the way a man shows someone something he is proud of carefully, with attention to detail, pointing out what had been and what it was now, and what it was going to be. He showed her the creek where the water ran clear over limestone, and where the cottonwoods had gone yellow, their leaves trembling in a slight wind. He showed her the northern pasture and the cattle grazing in it, and explained the bloodlines and why he had brought in particular bulls from a rancher in Gonzales County, and what he was hoping to achieve with the herd over the next several years. She listened and asked questions, good ones, and he answered them with the same care he brought to everything. And somewhere in the middle of a conversation about carrying capacity of the northern pasture and whether it could support another 50 head through a dry summer, she became aware that she was happy. Not overwhelmingly happy, not the kind of happiness that announces itself with fireworks and declarations. The quiet kind. The kind that you almost miss because you are busy paying attention to something else, and then you notice it has been there for a little while, sitting beside you like a warm animal. She kept it to herself for the time being. It seemed too new and fragile to name aloud. The trouble arrived in November, the way trouble in West Texas in 1874 often arrived on horseback, with insufficient warning, in the form of men who wanted what they had not earned. Their names, as Belle would learn later, were Rance Holloway and his younger brother Pete, and they had been making a systematic nuisance of themselves throughout Beaumont County for the better part of 2 years, running off cattle, intimidating smaller operations, and generally operating on the theory that remote country and overworked law enforcement were conditions they could exploit indefinitely. Belle was in the kitchen when she heard the horses come into the yard. She looked out the window and saw 2 men she did not recognize dismounting at the hitching post in front of the house. She noted several things quickly and without drama. That there was no one else in the yard because Clement and Dewey and Santos were all out on the range. That the men's horses were lathered more than a simple ride from town would account for. And that the way they moved toward the house had a quality to it she could only describe as deliberate. The particular deliberateness of men who had decided in advance how an interaction was going to go. She was at the door before they knocked, which she could tell disconcerted them slightly. Mrs. Bishop, the taller one, said. He had a thick reddish beard and small eyes set too close together. "Yes," she said, "Rance Holloway. Me and my brother Pete are neighbors of yours in a manner of speaking. We've got some business with your husband." "He's not here," she said. "What is the business?" The man called Rance looked at her with an expression that was meant to be pleasant but was actually the thing that pleasant expression is a mask for. "We've got a matter of some cattle that we believe may have crossed over onto Double C land. We'd like to come in and wait for Mr. Bishop." "No," she said. He blinked. "Ma'am, I said no. If you have business with my husband, you can ride back to town and send word, and he will meet with you at a time and place of mutual agreement. You are not coming into this house to wait." The man called Pete, who was younger and twitchier than his brother, made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a snort. Rance Holloway looked at Belle Talbot with the expression of a man recalculating something. "Now, ma'am," he said, and his voice had lost the pleasant quality entirely. "That's not exactly a hospitable way to—" "I am not interested in being hospitable," she said. "I am interested in you getting back on your horses. My husband will hear about your visit, and he will be in contact with you through the appropriate channels. Good day, Mr. Holloway." She held the door in their eyes and did not blink, and the thing that Rance Holloway found when he looked at Belle Talbot was a woman who had sat beside small graves in the blazing Texas sun with a shovel in her hands and had not broken. Whatever he had expected to find, it was not this. They left. She stood on the porch and watched them until they were off the property, and then she went inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands flat on the table, not shaking, simply grounding herself in the solidity of the wood. When Clement came in that evening, she told him about it before he had taken off his coat. She told him all of it, exactly what had been said, exactly what she had done, and exactly why. He listened all the way through without interrupting, which she was coming to understand was one of the things she most valued about him. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "The Holloways," he said. "You know them. I know of them. They have been pressuring a couple of the smaller ranchers further east. I have been waiting for them to turn their attention this way." He paused. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. "I was not frightened, I was angry." "You did exactly right," he said. He said it simply, directly, the way he said everything, but she heard in it something that was not just approval but something deeper, a recognition, a genuine respect for what she had done and how she had done it. "I am going to ride to Harlan Springs tomorrow and speak to the county sheriff, Beaumont Greer. He has been building a file on the Holloways for some time. This may be the catalyst he needs." "Good," she said. He looked at her across the kitchen in the evening lamplight. "Belle," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, she realized, the first time since the wedding that he had stepped over that last small formal distance between them. "I want you to know that I did not bring you out here to put you in the path of men like that." "I know," she said, "but men like that are in the path whether you put them there or not. That is the nature of the country." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "it is." Something had shifted, quietly and without announcement, in the temperature of the space between them. He did ride to Harlan Springs the next day, and Sheriff Beaumont Greer, who was a deliberate man in his 50s with a reputation for eventual thoroughness, took the information about the Holloway's visit to the Double C with the gravity it deserved and promised to act on it. He had, as Clement had suspected, been building a legal case against the Holloways for some months, and the visit to the Double C and Belle's account of the interaction provided him with enough to bring both brothers in for questioning. The Holloways were held for 2 days before being released on the understanding that any further harassment of ranchers in Beaumont County would result in charges that would stick. It was not a perfect resolution. It was the kind of resolution the frontier offered: imperfect, contingent, dependent on continued vigilance. But it was sufficient for the present. What interested Belle more than the resolution itself was the conversation she and Clement had the night he returned from Harlan Springs, sitting by the fire in the front room with coffee going cold on the table between them. He told her about Sheriff Greer and the Holloways, and then, in the way of a conversation that has been building towards something and finally arrives there, they began to talk about things that had nothing to do with the Holloways at all. He told her about his father, a hard-working man from Georgia, who had brought his family to Texas after the war with nothing but determination, and had built something modest but honest, and who had died of a heart failure at 57 years old, still working, still building. He told her about his mother, who was a sharp, spare woman living now in Dallas with his father's sister, who had opinions about most things and expressed them without hesitation. Belle told him about her own mother, who had died when Belle was 15, a gentle woman who had been quietly extraordinary in the way of women, whose extraordinary qualities are never catalogued because no one thinks to look. She told him about her father, a man who had loved her but had been entirely unprepared for the raising of a daughter on his own, and had done his fumbling, earnest best at it until he died of pneumonia when she was 19. She told him, with more detail this time, about Thomas and Ruth. Not as casualties, but as people: Thomas, who had been so small and perfect, and who had opened his eyes once before he left, and Ruth, who had laughed at the sound of the wind, and had been pulling herself to standing by holding onto the cabinet doors, and had been fierce and determined in the way that Belle recognized as her own nature reflected back at her in a small new form. Clement listened to all of it with his full, unhurried attention, and at the end he said, "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for listening," she said. "They would have been remarkable," he said, "given who their mother is." She looked at him and felt the warmth that had been building quietly between them press harder against her chest, trying to find a way out. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone more difficult," she said honestly. "The letter was so brusque," he said. "I was going to say efficient, The corner of his mouth moved. "I write better than I speak in general. I speak better than I write." "You speak very well," she said. The fire had burned low while they were talking, and the room was warm, and the night outside the windows was very dark and very quiet. And Belle Talbot, who was Belle Bishop now, though the name still fit like a slightly new boot, looked at this man she had married and understood that the possibility she had felt on the first wagon ride, and the quiet happiness she had noticed on the morning ride, and the respect she had felt in him when she told him about the Holloways had been building toward something. That they had been building toward this particular evening by a dying fire, telling each other the true shapes of their lives. "Clement," she said. "Yes," he said. "I think I would like to actually be married to you," she said, "rather than in the vicinity of marriage." He looked at her steadily for a moment with those gray eyes that missed very little. "I think I would like that too," he said. It was not a declaration of love. It was something perhaps more meaningful. It was the declaration of intention, the decision made clearly and kept. What grew between them after that evening was not the sudden, consuming passion of romantic stories that Belle had read in her youth in the novels her mother kept in a box under the bed. It was something that grew the way the ranch itself had grown, incrementally, solidly, one good day built on top of the last. It was the accumulation of small things. The coffee she made the way he took it without being told to, because she had paid attention. The way he fixed the porch step without being asked, because he had noticed it bothered her. The conversations over dinner that lasted hours because they were both people who thought about things and valued the company of someone else who did. The evenings on the porch in the last of the autumn light where they sat side by side and said very little and did not need to. December came and brought cold, and with it Clement's mother, Vera Bishop, who arrived from Dallas on the stage with 2 large trunks and a formidable pair of opinions, and an expression that suggested she was going to have a thorough look at this new wife of her son's and form a verdict based on evidence. Belle met her on the porch and offered her hand, and Vera Bishop took it and looked at her for a long, assessing moment. "He said in his letter that you were capable," Vera said. She had sharp blue eyes and gray hair and a posture that the years had not bowed in the slightest. "He did not say you were pretty." "He was not wrong on either count," Belle said. Vera Bishop looked at her and then did something Belle had not expected. She laughed. It was a genuine laugh, short and warm. "You'll do," Vera said, and walked into the house. The week of Vera's visit was illuminating in a number of ways. Belle watched Clement with his mother and understood things about him that she could not have understood any other way, where the directness came from, and the patience, and the deep sense of responsibility for the things he had taken on. Vera Bishop was a strong woman who had raised her son to see strength in women as a natural and unremarkable fact, and Belle could see the shape of that in him, the way it had made him into a man who did not require women to be smaller than they were. She also learned, on the 3rd evening of the visit when Clement had gone to the barn to check on a horse that had been slightly off its feed, that Vera Bishop was a woman who gathered information directly. "He's been alone too long," Vera said. She was sitting across from Belle at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "I know," Belle said. "He does not show things easily," Vera said, "but he feels them. He felt Henry's death, that is his father, deeply, more deeply than he let on to anyone." "I imagine he did," Belle said. "He chose you carefully," Vera said. "He wrote to me before he placed the notice. He asked me what I thought. I told him to look for someone who had already been through something and had not broken, because a woman who has never been tested by difficulty will break when the difficulty comes, and it always comes on a ranch like this." Belle was quiet for a moment. "Is that what he was looking for, someone who had been tested?" "He thought he was," Vera said. "He thinks in practical terms. It is the way his mind works. But I think what he was actually looking for was someone real, someone who had lived through something and come out of it still themselves." She looked at Belle with those sharp blue eyes. "I think he found that." Belle said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I want to make him happy. I want that genuinely, not as an obligation." Vera studied her. "I can see that," she said. "Good." She took a drink of her coffee. He will make you happy too. He just takes a little patience at the start." "I have patience," Belle said. "I know," Vera said. "I can see that too." When Vera Bishop left on the stage back to Dallas, she hugged Belle at the depot in Harlan Springs, a brief, firm, genuine hug that said more than the words that had been said over the visit. Belle watched the stage pull away and felt something warm settle in her chest, a small gift, the approval of a woman she had come to respect. Clement stood beside her and watched the stage go. "She likes you," he said. "I like her," Belle said. "She told me," he started and then stopped. "What?" He was quiet for a moment. In the particular way he was quiet when he was deciding whether to say something. "She told me that you were the right choice." Her exact words were, "That woman has more steel in her spine than any woman I have met in 20 years, and she has a kind heart besides. Do not make a mess of this." Belle felt a smile begin. "She is not wrong about the steel," she said. "No," he agreed. "She is not." He looked at her in the December light outside the depot in Harlan Springs, and there was something in his gray eyes that was no longer assessing or measuring, but was open in a way she had not seen before. "Belle," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am—" He stopped again, began differently. "I am grateful that you came." She looked at him. She understood that this was, for him, not a small statement. It was not a simple expression of social pleasantry. For a man who chose words the way he chose them, carefully, accurately, only when he meant them exactly, gratitude of this quality was something he did not say easily. "So am I," she said. The winter was hard and beautiful and long. The days were short and cold and full of work. There was always work on a cattle ranch in winter, the constant attention to the welfare of the animals, the maintenance of equipment, the thousand small preventive acts that separated a well-run operation from a disaster waiting to happen. Belle learned the rhythms of the double C in winter the way she had learned it in autumn, by being present and paying attention and asking questions, and doing the work that presented itself. She and Clement developed a life together that had its own particular quality, like a piece of music that has been written specifically for the instruments at hand, making use of what each could do rather than forcing them into a form that did not suit. They were both early risers. They both preferred directness to diplomacy. They both had a quality of internal quiet that meant their silences together were companionable rather than strained. They disagreed, occasionally, on specific matters. Belle thought the North Pasture should be rested for a full season rather than partially. Clement thought 2 seasons was too long to leave the carrying capacity unused. And they disagreed directly and argued their positions with actual evidence, and changed each other's minds about things, and were not frightened by the process. It was the most functional relationship Belle had ever had, and it was, she recognized with a quiet and growing certainty, becoming the most important one. On a January evening when the temperature had dropped hard and the wind was pushing against the windows with actual intent, they sat by the fire and Clement was quiet for a long time, not the companionable quiet but a different kind, with a weight in it. "You are thinking about something specific," she said. He looked at her. "I am thinking about the fact that I am in love with you," he said. Belle was quiet for a moment that was very still and very full. "Is that something you wanted to say or something that came out unexpectedly?" she asked. "Both," he said. She looked at him, this lean, careful, honest man who had built a good thing out of difficult country and who had been alone in it for too long and who had chosen, with characteristic deliberateness, to reach for something more, and she felt the warmth that had been building in her since October rise and fill the whole space of her chest. "I am in love with you too," she said. "I have been for some time. I was not sure when to say it." "Now was good," he said. She moved across the space between the chairs and sat beside him on the bench by the fire, and he put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and they sat like that for a long time while the wind did its work against the windows, and the fire did its work against the cold. It was the simplest and most profound thing she had experienced in years. The ordinary, extraordinary act of being held by someone who knew who you were and had chosen you anyway. Spring came slowly to the double C, creeping up through the ground in the form of green grass pushing through the winter brown. And with it came the expansion Clement had been planning. He bought 60 head of additional cattle from a rancher in the next county. A good deal, well negotiated, and the new cattle came in healthy and were integrated into the herd without significant difficulty. Dewey, who had somewhere in the winter developed a grudging approval of Belle that manifested as occasional willingness to say more than 4 consecutive words in her presence, declared the new cattle decent stock, and that was his full endorsement. Santos, who had taken to stopping at the kitchen door in the mornings on his way from the bunkhouse to the barn, had become a kind of steady daily presence that Belle found genuinely fond. He was a good young man with a quick mind and a generous heart, and he was building something of his own in his small way, saving money, learning the business end of ranching from Clement with the serious application of someone who intended to use the information. In April, on a morning when the air smelled of rain that had not yet come, and the prairie was at its most green and extravagant, Belle found herself standing in the kitchen garden she had worked all winter and through early spring, looking at the rows of vegetables coming up in the good dark soil, and feeling a fullness in herself that she identified after a moment as joy. Simple, specific, located in this particular place and this particular life. She was going to have a child. She had not told Clement yet. She had been carrying the knowledge for 2 weeks, holding it in the way of someone who has been given a gift so fine they are almost afraid to take it out and show it to anyone for fear of what the light might do to it. But the time for that particular caution had passed. She found him in the near pasture checking the fence line on the north side, moving along it with the methodical attention he brought to everything, and she came across the field toward him in the spring morning, and he looked up and saw her coming, and something in the set of his face shifted immediately. The particular attention he gave her that was different from the attention he gave everything else, sharper and warmer at once. "You are coming toward me with something on your mind," he said, when she was close enough. "I am," she said. She told him. The expression that moved across Clement Bishop's face in the moment of being told that he was going to be a father was one that Belle would carry with her for the rest of her life. It moved from stillness through something raw and unguarded, and then into a joy so direct and undefended that she felt the tears on her own face before she was aware of having begun to cry. He crossed the space between them and held her face in his rough, warm hands and looked at her with those gray eyes that were not careful now but completely open. "Belle," he said, and there was everything in the single word. "I know," she said. "I know." He held her in the middle of the spring pasture for a long time, and the wind came off the hills and moved the green grass around them, and the cattle grazed somewhere in the middle distance. And it was one of those moments that is so complete it seems to exist slightly outside of time, preserved. She did think of Thomas and Ruth, and she did feel the bittersweet quality of that thinking. The way happiness and grief can occupy the same space in a person without canceling each other out. She thought of them and also held this new thing, this new person coming. "Are you frightened?" Clement asked. He knew enough of her history now to ask the real question. "Yes," she said honestly, "but not in a way that overwhelms the rest of it." "Good," he said. "I am frightened too." "Are you?" "Tremendously," he said, and said it in the same way he said everything as a simple fact without apology, but not in a way that overwhelms the rest of it. She pulled back and looked at him and smiled, and he smiled back, and it was the full smile this time, the one he gave rarely enough that receiving it felt like something earned. The pregnancy was healthy. Belle approached it with the practical attention she brought to everything, eating well, working at the pace her body told her was reasonable, accepting Clement's care without making an issue of it, which it turned out was exactly the approach he required. He was attentive without being overbearing. He modified what needed to be modified around the ranch without asking her to do less than she was capable of doing, which was a fine distinction but an important one. He checked on her without hovering. He asked how she felt and listened to the actual answer. When she had a difficult night in July, just fear mostly, lying awake with the old losses sitting close in the dark. He was awake too, as he always seemed to know when she needed him to be. And he lay beside her in the dark and talked about the most ordinary things he could think of: the state of the summer grass, the temperament of the new bull, what Santos had said at dinner that had made Dewey produce something that was almost certainly a smile. And the ordinariness of it was the specific medicine the moment required, tethering her to the present and to the good life she was actually living. "You are here," he said at one point quietly, not a question. "I am here," she confirmed. "So am I," he said. "I know," she said. "That is the thing that makes the difference." Dewey Crane, who Belle had come to understand, was a man of deep and mostly unexpressed emotion who had developed his own way of showing that he cared, appeared one morning in August with a length of good cedar wood and spent 3 days in the barn making a cradle. He presented it to Belle without ceremony, set it in the doorway of the house, said, "For the baby," and walked back to the barn. It was finely made, with curved rockers and a smoothness to the wood that spoke of real care and considerable time. Belle ran her hand along it and felt her throat tighten. She went to the barn and found Dewey in the middle of something involving a length of fence wire. "Dewey," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "It is beautiful." He looked at the fence wire. "It'll do," he said. She smiled and went back to the house. The baby came in late October, 1 year almost to the month of her arrival at the Double C, delivered with the assistance of Mrs. Dolores Ramos from Harlan Springs, who was the nearest thing the county had to a midwife, and who was competent and direct, and had delivered half the children in Beaumont County, and regarded the process with the matter-of-fact efficiency of long experience. He was a boy. He was healthy and loud, and had dark hair that stood up in a way that made Belle laugh even in the immediate aftermath of the effort of getting him into the world. And he had gray eyes that would not settle into their permanent color for some weeks, but that Belle suspected immediately were going to be exactly his father's. Clement sat on the edge of the bed and held his son with the careful wonder of a man handling something precious, and the expression on his face was the most beautiful thing Belle had ever seen. It was the same openness she had seen in April in the pasture, but deeper now, with the weight of the real and present thing in his arms. "He is perfect," Clement said, in the same way he said things when he meant them completely. "He is," Belle agreed. "What do we name him?" he asked, looking up at her. They had discussed names through the summer but had not arrived at a final decision, which had been a source of gentle, ongoing conversation rather than any kind of conflict. "James," Belle said. She had decided this at some point in the last hour without being fully aware of the decision arriving. "James Henry Bishop." James for no particular name before, just because it is a good strong name. Henry for your father. Clement looked at her with eyes that were not careful at all in that moment. "James Henry," he said. He looked back down at the baby. "James Henry Bishop." "Yes." She watched him hold their son and felt the completeness of it, not the completeness of a life finished, but the completeness of a life properly constructed, with all its pieces present and in their right places. Thomas was there, and Ruth, in the love she carried for them and always would. And James was here, warm and present and loudly objecting to various aspects of his new circumstances. And Clement was here, holding his son with his careful, warm hands, looking at him with those gray, open eyes. The winter that followed was the warmest of Belle's memory, though the temperature was no different from the year before. What was different was the sound of the house, the presence in it of James Henry Bishop, who turned out to have opinions about most things, and a set of lungs designed to convey them at considerable volume. Clement adapted to fatherhood with the same methodical seriousness he brought to everything, approaching James's care as a competency to be learned and then practiced until it was natural, and he proved a remarkably good father, patient and present, and genuinely interested in the small person who was arriving into the world on his own terms. Belle watched them together, father and son, in the mornings while she dressed, Clement walking the baby in the front room at night when James was restless. The particular look on Clement's face when he was doing nothing more than watching the baby sleep, and felt the love she had for this man she had married expand to contain all of it. She wrote to Vera Bishop in Dallas with the news, and Vera wrote back within 2 weeks with a letter that was 3 pages long and contained both thorough grandmotherly joy and a detailed list of opinions on infant care, several of which were contradictory. Belle read the letter to Clement in the evenings, and he listened to his mother's opinions with the forbearance of a man who had been the subject of them his whole life and loved her anyway. Vera came to visit in February, arriving with 2 trunks and a new set of opinions, and a warmth for both Belle and James that was entirely without the assessing quality of her first visit. She held James with the confidence of a woman who had held babies before and looked down at him with something pure and grandmotherly and direct. "He has your eyes, Clement," she said. "Belle thinks so too," Clement said. "He has her stubbornness," Vera added. "He is 2 months old," Belle said. "You cannot know that yet." "I absolutely can," Vera said, and bounced James gently, and he regarded her with the solemn gray eyes that were, in fact, becoming definitively his father's. The year moved on. Spring came back, and with it the second year of work on the Double C, the expanded herd, the fence improvements that Clement had been planning, a new well dug on the north pasture that changed the practical carrying capacity in exactly the way Belle had argued it would. Santos Reyes, who was 21 now and had been with the Double C for over a year, announced one April evening that he had been writing to a young woman in San Angelo and that she had agreed to come out and marry him, and Belle said this called for celebration and produced the good bottle of whiskey she had been saving. Santos's young woman, whose name was Maria Fuentes, arrived in May with dark eyes and a quiet confidence and a love for Santos that was visible from a significant distance. Belle liked her, immediately recognized in her a particular kind of practical strength that she understood from the inside, and they became, over the summer, something like friends in the way of women on the frontier whose proximity and shared work naturally grows into something genuine. James Bishop grew through his first year at the pace of babies everywhere, which is to say with a speed that seemed impossible given how recently he had not existed. He was walking by the time the autumn came around again, lurching between the furniture with a determination that reminded Belle sharply and painfully and joyfully of Ruth, and making himself felt in every corner of the house and the yard and anywhere else he could manage to get himself. He had Clement's gray eyes and Belle's dark hair, and a temperament that was all his own, curious and persistent, and with a streak of humor that manifested at 14 months of age in a tendency to do things specifically because he knew he was not supposed to, watching his parents' faces as he did to see what would happen. Clement regarded this tendency with a severity that Belle could see was at least 50% suppressed amusement. On the evening of James's first birthday, after the boy had been put to bed, and the house had gone quiet and Belle and Clement were sitting on the porch in the October dark with coffee, and the particular satisfaction of people who have survived a year of new parenthood and found it good, Clement said something that had been building toward expression for some time. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Tell me," she said. "When I wrote that notice in the Harlan County Gazette," he said, "I wrote about needing a woman who could endure. I said it because I meant it practically. The ranch, the work, the country, I needed someone who could stand up to it." "I know," she said. "I did not know," he said, "what endurance actually meant, what it looked like, what it cost." He paused. "I knew what I needed. I did not know what you had already been through, what you had already endured before you ever stepped foot on this property." She was quiet, listening. "You had buried children," he said. "You had been abandoned by a man who did not deserve you. You had run a homestead alone for over a year. You had grieved more than most people are called to grieve. And you had come through all of it and not become bitter, not become closed. You had remained," he seemed to be looking for the right word, and he found it with the same care he found all his words, "intact, Entirely yourself. She looked at him in the dark. I wrote that notice thinking I was looking for a woman who could handle difficulty, he said. What I found was a woman who had already handled difficulty I could not have imagined, and had done it with a grace I will spend the rest of my life admiring. Belle Talbot Bishop looked at her husband for a long, full moment. The night air was cool, and the stars over the Texas hills were the dense, unhurried stars of a place far from any city, and the double sea was quiet around them, and James was sleeping inside, and all the pieces of her life that had been scattered and broken and gathered again were here, assembled into something that was more than the sum of them. "I want to tell you something too," she said. "Tell me," he said. "When I wrote back to your notice," she said, "I was not hopeful, I was willing. Those are different things. I was willing to try something that might be better than what I had, and I had low expectations for better because my experience of better had not been reliable." "I understand," he said. "What I found," she said, "was not what I expected and not what I feared. It was something I had not fully let myself believe existed, which is a person who sees me, who actually sees me, all of it, the capable parts and the broken parts and the parts that are still in the process of being repaired, and stays. Not because they have to, because they want to." She felt his hand find hers in the dark. "I am not the woman I was when I got off the stage in Harlan Springs," she said. "Not because I have changed essentially, but because I have been given the space to be all of what I was already. You did that. This place did that. We did it together," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in the dark and looked at the stars over the double sea and the land that they had built together. That was theirs in the deepest sense of that word, not just by deed and title, but by the investment of themselves in it. "What do you want?" he asked after a while, "for the next years?" She thought about it honestly, in the way she thought about everything. "More of this," she said. "More of exactly this. James growing up on this land, the work continuing. The herd expanding, maybe another child." She paused. "Santos and Maria settled on the property or near it. Dewey going on being Dewey and being wrong about rain and making fine cradles when no one is watching. You and I getting better at this, at being what we are to each other." He turned to look at her, and she could see his face in the faint light from the window behind them, the gray eyes, the lean, marked face of a man who had built something out of difficulty and had not been diminished by the difficulty but had been made by it. "And you?" she asked. "What do you want?" "All of that," he said. "Every word of it." He kissed her in the October dark on the porch of the double sea, and it had in it everything the year had built: the respect and the dailiness and the grief they had shared, and the joy they had made, and the ordinary, extraordinary fact of two people who had chosen each other against all the alternatives and found the choosing justified. The second year moved with the confidence of something established. The double sea grew, carefully, in the measured way of a man who did not believe in overextension, but consistently with purpose. The herd was 380 head by spring, and the finances of the operation had achieved a stability that Clement described, in the understated manner he brought to Good News, as solid. The well on the north pasture had, as Belle had predicted, transformed the carrying capacity of that land, and the spring grass was thick, and the cattle were fat, and the entire operation had the feeling of something finally arrived at a pace it could sustain. Santos and Maria were married in the Harlan Springs church in March, and Belle stood beside Maria as she had asked, and Clement stood beside Santos and the Reverend Alcott, who had now performed ceremonies for both of them, seemed slightly surprised to encounter the same group of witnesses in approximately the same arrangement, though now with a toddler added who had to be contained throughout the proceedings. James was 17 months old at the Santos and Maria wedding, and had opinions about the ceremony, most of which he expressed at a volume disproportionate to his size. Dewey Crane held him for most of the service, which was a combination nobody had predicted, and which worked improbably well, possibly because James found Dewey's silence restful. In the summer of that second year, Belle heard from the county that Roy Talbot had been located in Kansas. He had taken up with a woman in Wichita, had never filed for any legal separation from Belle, and the discovery of this situation had come about because the Wichita woman's family had pursued a legal complaint. The letter from the county court was formal and dry, and asked Belle to come to Harlan Springs to provide a sworn statement in the matter of Talbot versus Talbot. She went, gave the statement, and came away with legal confirmation of what she had known practically for 3 years, that her first marriage was dissolved by abandonment, and that she was, as she had been for some time in every meaningful sense, Clement Bishop's wife. She was not angry. She had spent the anger a long time ago, sitting in the barn with the mule the day she understood Roy was not coming back. What she felt now was the clean finality of a door properly closed. She told Clement about it that evening, and he listened and said nothing for a moment and then said, "Good. That's exactly what I thought," she said. He looked at her with those gray eyes. And nothing," she said. "It is done. It was done a long time ago." He nodded. That was all that needed saying. The summer continued. In August, Maria Reyes told Belle she was expecting, and Belle took her hands and felt genuine joy for the young woman, the particular joy of someone who understands what is at stake in that announcement and wishes for her the best possible outcome. Belle herself, by September, had her own suspicion about another matter, which confirmed itself slowly and then definitively. She told Clement on a September evening while the sun was going down red over the hill to the west. He was quiet for a moment. Then the full smile came, the real one. "James is going to be furious," he said. She laughed. "He is 2 years old. He has no concept of the situation." "He will develop one when the situation arrives," Clement said. He was laughing too, quiet and genuine. "Good, this is good, Belle." "Yes," she said, "it is." They stood together in the September evening and watched the sun complete its descent, and the sky go from red to deep purple, and then to the dark blue of an early night. And the cattle were sounds in the pasture, and James was in the house with Santos keeping an eye on him. And this life that had been built from difficult materials was as full and as real as a life could be. The second baby arrived in April, a girl this time, with Belle's dark eyes and Clement's serious expression, which on a newborn was both incongruous and perfect. They named her Clara, not after the mare, or not only, but because it was a good clear name and Belle had always liked it, and Clement had said, when she offered it, that it was exactly right. Clara Bishop arrived to a house that was ready for her, the cedar cradle brought back down from where it had been stored, the same care and attention given to its small occupant that had been given to the one before, but now with a 2-year-old James providing an enthusiastic, if occasionally alarming, additional welcome. James Bishop's initial response to his sister was an expression of profound perplexity that gave way, over the first weeks, to a proprietary tenderness that suggested he had decided she was something between a fascinating new arrival and his personal project. Clement held Clara the way he had held James, with that careful, open wonder, and Belle watched him and felt the accumulated love of the past year and a half settle further into her bones, becoming structural, becoming part of the architecture of who she was. "She has your eyes," Clement said. "Yes," Belle said. "She has your determination, too," he said. "She is 3 days old," Belle said. "I know," he said, and glanced at her with that almost smile. "I could tell when she arrived. She was not going to be moved." Belle thought of Ruth, who had also had determination and dark eyes, and let herself sit with that for a moment, the grief and the love in the same place, coexisting the way they did, the way she had learned they could without the grief canceling the love or the love dishonoring the grief. "Ruth would have liked her," Belle said. Clement looked at her. "Tell me about Ruth," he said. He said it in the way he said things when he genuinely wanted to know. Belle smiled, and it was a smile that held both things, the sorrow and the love. "She was fierce," she said. She was trying to stand up by holding onto the cabinet doors. She was not going to let the cabinets win. She laughed at the wind. She paused. She would have been 3 this spring. Clement reached for her hand, and she took it. "She is here," he said, "in you, in the way you are, in this house you have made and what you have built here." Belle leaned her head against his shoulder. "Yes," she said, "she is." The spring of 1876 on the Double C was a particular kind of beautiful, the kind that comes when things have been built carefully and the building has held, and you can look at what you have made with the satisfaction of someone who knows what it cost. The ranch was healthy. The herd was growing. Santos and Maria's baby, a boy named Eduardo, who was 6 months old and already had Santos's grin, gave James a playmate in waiting. Dewey Crane had said, in an unprecedented display of personal revelation, that he thought the Double C was shaping up, which from Dewey was equivalent to a formal speech of praise from anyone else. Belle planted her kitchen garden in April and walked the property in the mornings, sometimes before the rest of the house was awake, with Clara on her hip and James trotting alongside, talking at the volume he always talked, which was loud. She would walk to the creek and stand on the bank and look at the amber water moving over the limestone and feel the solidity of the ground under her feet. She had come here with a trunk and a bag and $17.40, and the spine that people underestimated. She had come here to endure. She had not come here expecting this. Clement found her at the creek on one of those mornings in late April. He had come looking, which he sometimes did, not out of worry, but out of wanting to be where she was. He stood beside her on the bank, and Clara reached for him, and he took her and balanced her against his shoulder with the ease of a man for whom this was now entirely natural. James was attempting to put a stick into the creek and was working out the practical difficulties of this. "I have been thinking," Clement said. "About what?" she asked. "About what this is," he said. "What we have built. And what have you concluded?" He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet that meant he was looking for the right words. "I came to that notice in the Harlan County Gazette looking for someone who could endure," he said. "That was the full scope of my thinking at the time. I needed practical help and practical companionship, and someone who would not be undone by the country." He looked at Clara, who was studying his face with her serious dark eyes. "I had no idea I was reaching for something this large." Belle looked at the creek moving. "Neither did I," she said. "I want to tell you something," he said. "You told me last October," she said gently, "on James's birthday." "I know," he said. "I want to tell you again." She looked up at him. The morning light was on his face, and the creek was making its sound over the limestone, and James had solved the stick problem and was now moving upstream with the focused energy of someone on an important mission. "I love you, Belle Bishop," he said. "More than I have the language to say adequately, though I intend to keep trying." She felt the fullness in her chest that had become her familiar companion in the good days, and the good days were plentiful now, built one on top of the last. "I love you, Clement Bishop," she said, "more than I thought I was capable of after everything." "After everything," he repeated. He understood exactly what that meant. James came back downstream toward them at speed, having found something he needed to show them immediately. Belle caught him and lifted him up beside her and pointed out what he had found: a river stone, unusual in color, with a stripe of white quartz running through it. "Keep that," she told him. "That is a treasure." He held it with both hands with the gravity of someone to whom this had been correctly communicated. She stood on the bank of the creek on the Double C in the April morning with her husband beside her and her daughter in his arms and her son in her arms, and felt, in the deepest part of herself, the answer to a question she had been asking for years. She had endured. She had endured more than anyone had known, more than she had let show, more than she had expected to survive when she was sitting in the barn with the mule and the full weight of being left. She had carried Thomas and Ruth forward with her. She had gotten on the stage with a trunk and a bag and a spine that would not bend. And what she had found on the other side of all of it was not just survival. It was not just sufficiency. It was this morning, this man, these children, this land that she now knew as well as she had known any place in her life that she had poured herself into and that had given back in kind. She had not come looking for love. She had come looking for a foothold. And she had found both the foothold and the love that had grown up around it like the green grass grows up around the limestone in the spring, inevitable and persistent and alive. Clement reached across and tucked a strand of her dark hair back from her face with his free hand, the same hand that had been rough and warm and deliberate the day of their wedding, still rough and warm and now entirely deliberate in a different and better way. "Still here," he said. "Still here," she said. "Good," he said. The double C ran on through the seasons of 1876, growing steadily under the care of two people who understood the value of patient, consistent work. Clement expanded the herd to 420 head by autumn, and the finances of the operation had crossed from solid to what Belle's meticulous ledger records suggested was genuinely prosperous. Not extravagantly so, but in the deep, sustainable way of a thing built right. Santos and Maria's life on the property had given the Double C the quality of a small community. Eduardo was walking by summer and was James's devoted companion, the two of them conducting ongoing explorations of every corner of the ranch that were simultaneously endearing and a practical hazard. Maria had taken on the management of a kitchen garden of her own near the bunkhouse, and the two gardens between them supplied more food through the summer and autumn than either household could use, which meant Belle began organizing exchanges with the families in Harlan Springs who had things they needed and things they could offer, which turned into something modest but real. A network of mutual assistance that the women of Beaumont County had been quietly maintaining for years, and that Belle now became a working part of. The Holloway matter reached its conclusion in the fall. Rance and Pete Holloway were finally charged with cattle theft and property crimes against 3 ranchers in the county, including the Double C, where 2 cattle had in fact been run off the south pasture in the spring, in an incident that Belle had documented in her ledger with dates and numbers, and the kind of organized precision that proved unexpectedly useful when Sheriff Greer came asking for evidence. The brothers were tried in Beaumont County in October and convicted and removed from the territory, and the thing that had been a low ongoing concern settled into the past. Belle stood on the porch the evening she heard the verdict and looked out at the Double C and thought about standing at the door of the house in November of the previous year and telling Rance Holloway no, not because she was without fear, but because the fear was not the controlling thing. She thought about all the things that had not been the controlling thing, all the grief that had not broken her, all the difficulty that had not made her smaller. Clement came and stood beside her, and she told him about the verdict, and he said good, in the tone that meant a thing was properly closed. "Dewey will be relieved," she said. "Dewey will express his relief by saying nothing whatsoever," Clement said. "I know," she said. "That is how I will know." He put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, and the porch held them both in the late afternoon light. By the time the winter of 1876 settled over the Double C, James Bishop was 2 years old and Clara was 8 months, and the house on the limestone foundation that Clement had built and Belle had made into a home was full of sound and warmth and the ordinary extraordinary business of a life being lived well. The kitchen had Belle's organization on every shelf and Clement's practical additions, a new pump that worked in cold weather, shelves he had built from good cedar to her specifications. The front room had the fire and the chairs where they sat in the evenings when the children were abed, talking or reading or sitting in the good quiet together. The letters went out regularly to Vera Bishop in Dallas, who came twice a year and had become a grandmother in the full sense, and to a woman named Hattie who had been Belle's nearest friend in Harlan County, and who had written when Belle left and continued to write, wanting to know how life in the West was treating her. Belle's letter to Hattie in December of 1876 was the longest she had written in some time. She sat at the kitchen table in the afternoon while both children slept and Clement was somewhere on the range, and the house was quiet in its good winter way, and she wrote, "You ask in your last letter if I am happy. I have thought carefully about how to answer this because happiness is a word people use to mean different things, and I want to be accurate with you as I always have been. What I am is this: full. My life is full in a way it has not been before. There is work and love and difficulty, and joy and grief carried forward and new joy beside it, and a man who sees me completely, and a boy who is trouble on two legs, and a daughter who I think is going to run the entire territory one day. There is a ranch that is ours in the deep sense of that word. There is a life that is mine in a way my life has never been mine before, not despite everything I endured to get here, but because of it. All of it brought me here. I would not undo any of it. She looked at what she had written for a moment. She folded the letter and sealed it and set it aside to go with the postal rider. She went to the window and looked out at the double sea in the December light, the pale winter grass, the dark cedar breaks on the hills, the cattle shapes in the middle distance, the barn with the light of the lantern visible at the crack of the door where Dewey was doing whatever Dewey did in the hours he spent in there alone. Santos was somewhere out on the north side, moving the herd. Clement would be back before dark. She thought of the morning she had stood over Ruth's grave with the sky that merciless open blue and felt the world at its most pitiless. She thought of the stage ride and the travel bag on her lap and the $17.40. She thought of a man who had said he needed a woman who could endure without understanding what endurance looked like from the inside. She understood now what she had not understood entirely then. That endurance is not the same as suffering. Endurance is what you do with the suffering. It is the decision, made daily and sometimes hourly, to continue and to remain yourself in the continuing. She had made that decision in the barn with the mule. She had made it on the stage. She had made it standing at the door with Rance Holloway on the other side. She had made it in the dark of July when the fear came for her. She would make it again tomorrow and the day after. And on the other side of all those decisions was this life, this man, these children, this house in the limestone hills of West Texas, with the creek running amber over the rock and the cattle grazing, and the kitchen garden waiting under the winter ground for the spring to come back and make things grow again. Clement's horse appeared on the ridge to the north, moving down toward the house in the long shadows of the late afternoon. She watched him come, the lean, unhurried figure of him on horseback, moving the way he moved through everything, with purpose and patience. She watched him cross the brown grass and come down toward the barn and disappear inside, and a few minutes later come out on foot and walk toward the house. She went to the door and opened it before he reached it. He looked up at her on the porch and the almost smile became the real one. "Good day," she asked. "Good enough," he said. "North fence needs attention in one place. The weather is going to turn in the next week." He came up the steps. "Dewey thinks we're in for a mild winter." "Then we are in for a hard one," she said. He laughed, the quiet, genuine laugh that she had earned over the months, and that still felt like something each time she heard it. He came up the last step and kissed her on the doorstep of the Double C in the December afternoon, unhurried and real, and she put her hand on his chest and felt his heartbeat under her palm. "James and Clara are sleeping," she said, "both of them, simultaneously. It is a miracle and I intend to use every minute of it." "For what?" he asked, the gray eyes warm. "Sitting down," she said. He laughed again. "Come on then," he said, and took her hand and they went inside together into the warm house, and the door closed behind them, and the Double C went on in the last of the day's light around them. The ranch that Clement had built out of nothing and that Belle had made into a home, and that was now, in every sense that mattered, theirs. Outside, the light faded over the Texas hills and the stars came out. All those unhurried, endless stars over the country that had tried them both and had not broken either of them. And inside the house the fire was lit, and the children slept, and two people sat together in the good, ordinary miracle of a life that had been endured into abundance. And the night came down over the Double C and was quiet and was good and was whole.